Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Welcome to Bookstore One. My name's Bryn Durgan. I'm the director of programming here. And I know most of you have, if you haven't even given your own book talk here, you've been to others. So thanks again for your continued support. This evening is going to be a lot of fun. We have three poets who will wind up in conversation, but we will start with Tim Nolan, move on to Rick Hillis, and then they will be in conversation with Bubba Henson. So let me just tell you a little bit about each of them first, and then I will pass along the microphone. So Bubba Henson is a poet and teacher living in Sarasota, Florida. After getting his M.F.A. from Columbia University in creative writing and poetry, Bubba worked for MTV Networks, USA Network, and Sci-Fi Network, and wrote for World Wrestling Entertainment.
Oh my God!
So, my favorite fact about him.
It's all real.
And Early Years magazine before becoming an English teacher.
Wow.
That road to WWE is interesting. His poetry and short stories have appeared in the Raven's Perch Nifty Lit Magazine 1, which is the bookstore's literary magazine, and the Laughing Unicorn magazines. Okay, and then next we have Tim Nolan, was born in Minneapolis and graduated from the University of Minnesota with a BA in English and from Columbia University in New York City with an MFA in writing. Tim is an attorney in private practice in Minneapolis. His poems have appeared in the Gettysburg Review, The Nation, The New Republic, Ploughshares, and on the Writer's Almanac and American Life and Poetry. 3 of his 5 collections, The Sound of It, And Then, and The Field, were published by New Rivers Press, and his 4th and 5th books, Lines and Things I Didn't Know I Loved, are from Nodin Press. Tim hosts the series Readings by Writers at the University Club of St. Paul, and his books are downstairs too. And Rick Hillis, a recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship, Whiting Award, and Camargo Fellowship, and the Amy Lowell Poetry Traveling Scholarship, is the author of Brother Salvage and A Map of the Lost World, both with the Pitt Poetry Series. His poems, essays, and translations have appeared or are forthcoming in Harper's, Kenyon Review, Literary Imagination, Narrative Magazine, The Nation, The New Republic, Poetry, Ploughshares, The Southern Review, the list goes on. He's currently a fellow at the Wurlitzer Foundation in New Mexico. He teaches in the English department and M.F.A. program at Vanderbilt University and lives in Nashville, Tennessee. And he just spent the week with us up in the loft teaching poetry. It sounds like it was a really wonderful workshop.
So much fun. So much fun.
So I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and again, be thinking of questions and reactions, and we can discuss them later. So let's give Tim a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Bryn, and thank you, Georgia. Is this on? Oh, very good. Okay, there. That's better, right?
Perfect.
Thank you. Nice to read with you, Rick. I just met Rick. Bubba, well, I could spend 10 minutes talking about Bubba, but he was like number 4 employee at MTV.
Really?
Is that right? You told me that. I mean, it might not be true, but that's what he said. So I have this book, a new book that is called Things I Didn't Know I Loved. And I should say, there's a famous poem and book by Nazim Hikmet, who's a Turkish poet. He's like, I would say, comparable to Neruda. He was a communist. Oh, God. He spent years in prison. And he still maintained this like attitude towards life that was kind of amazing. So I wrote a poem. So basically what I did is I looked at his poem called Things I Didn't Know I Loved, and I just copied it, kind of, for myself. So anyway, I'll read that later, but I'll start off with, I should say also, okay, this photograph is in my neighborhood in Minneapolis. It's the Boulevard, it's the W.R. Franks Boulevard Twins Entertainment Complex, which was a movie theater, a wedding reception area, and a bowling alley, all together. And the reason it means anything to me is that it's because my parents had their wedding reception at that place on the grand staircase, and their photographs. I'll read that poem. Okay, I'm going to start out with a lighter note. Scam likely. I think it's so forthright of them to announce themselves on my phone as scam likely. I almost want to pick up the call and say, thank you for being upfront about your intentions. But I don't do that, and scam likely goes into the ether looking for some sucker other than me, calling numbers endlessly. It must be a tough life for scam likely. First of all, he, why is he a he, should change his name from Scam Likely to Bob Olson. I would probably answer a call from Bob Olson, figuring he might be some insurance agent or some death benefit cremation society guy I could put off. And yet, Scam Likely, he is what he is. He has to be himself. He's from a long line of likelies. His father was a scam. His father too. Well, these counties aren't going to mean much to you, but they're all in Minnesota. These are the kind of headlines you get in Minnesota newspapers. Morton man dies in ATV crash in Renville County. First of all, it's not me. I would never be on an ATV. Plus, I'm not a Morton man. I have no idea where Morton is. Moreover, I'm pretty sure I've never been to Renville County, wherever that is. But even if I had, I wouldn't ever be on an ATV. What a silly way to die. I mean, he died in an ATV accident. Might as well say he was a total douchebag. Or something worse, I can't say. But it's really not at all good. And it shouldn't matter how you die, heart cancer, some total stroke, or some autoimmune thing. But you should try not to be that Morton man, flying on an ATV, flying off the narrow path into the trees in the deepest part of the woods. Smaller. My doctor says we generally want to get smaller as we get older. He says this because I'm getting bigger, which is not the right direction. I thought to ask him, how small? I thought that would be impertinent. Small enough to land on the head of a pin, small enough to fit between tweezers, as small as one needs to be. My doctor's voice is getting smaller now, so he sounds like he's way across the bay, whispering into his wife's ear, something he never said before. Oh, what would that be? I used to keep, when I couldn't write a poem, I would write a title to a poem, and then I'd end up with, 500 titles to poems that I hadn't written yet. But somehow that, I would then go back and write the poem. It would be like a poem, a title like Apple. And then years later, I'd write a poem called Apple. Well, that doesn't really have anything to do with this next poem, but I just thought of it. I like room service. This I'm not proud of. I don't like tents, hikes, canoes, backpacks, mosquito netting, anything canned, dehydrated, to be mixed with water, anything that has to be earned through some unusual physical effort. Basically, I like room service. Here I am lying on the bed, and you bring me a cheeseburger and a pretty good chocolate malt, and the French fries are okay, and you bring all of this to me on a clattering cart, and you lift the silver dome to present cheeseburger and fries with a sick pickle and wilted lettuce, but it's room service, so everything's, for the most part, forgiven. I realized that, I was saying this to Bubba, that I think I've been to Florida in my life maybe 6 times, maybe this is the 7th time. And each excursion to Florida was unique, and I don't know that you people who live in Florida understand how the northern part of the country envies you. I mean, just like 2 weeks ago, we had 12 inches of snow, and it was like 20 below. I mean, there were like 2 months where it was just miserable. It was just like, you want to die. You go out, stick yourself in the snow or something. Meanwhile, you guys have to deal with hurricanes and stuff. I mean, we just have tornadoes and snowstorms. Yeah. But we did have a snowstorm the other day. There's always a snowstorm around the time of the state high school boys basketball tournament and the state high school boys hockey tournament, which is the most important thing in Minnesota. This is called Memoir. Am I going really long?
We started late.
Okay, so I've got a few more minutes.
You do.
Okay. So this is called Memoir. And this actually, I sent this poem to a contest that the prize was $1,200, and I won it for this poem. And I was like, that's the most, I mean, I never got any money for a poem. My God, give me a break. But this is called Memoir. I should preface this. So I got a good friend, Eric Utney, of the Utney Review and the Utney Reader. And he shows up in crossword puzzles, New York Times crossword puzzles. He checked this out with Will Short, and he's been in the New York Times crossword puzzle 8 times. It's either Eric or Utney. But Utney, because there are lots of vowels, which is a crossword puzzle deal. Well, so this is a long way of explaining that I had lunch with Eric, and he was writing a memoir, and I came back to my office and I realized I was never going to write a memoir, but I could write a poem called Memoir. So this is memoir. There were days when I was worried, mostly about money, sometimes about love. Days when the sun lit the snow and I thought I would burst with the joy of the cold. Days of brilliant blue skies and soft, casual rain. Days traveling across the country during a heat wave, racing above a soft road. Day in, day out days when nothing special happened, when I just barely survived, when I was full of possibilities. Summer days in New York City, a kid dancing with a boombox booming. Days of death, the days when the kids were born, a day devoted to an old friend. Thanksgiving days and Christmas days and Good Fridays when life seemed on a pivot point. Those perpetual days of summer as a kid down at the lake for the whole day. Not so special and very special days. Days made for no good. Days made of only good. Sacramental days, along with those birthdays and death days that seem to mark some passage, as if from now on everything would be completely different. A couple of days in Paris, I wandered around by myself. I stopped when I wanted. I sat down at a cafe table. It seemed endless for the moment. The days would go on and would always somehow involve me.
Oh, wow.
Is that the end of my time, roughly?
I think you have more time.
Okay, I'll read the title poem, and then I'll turn it over to Rick. Well, as I said, like, writers, we're not, we'll steal from whatever we can get, but, I mean, almost every time I write a poem, I start out reading somebody else's poem. It's like you're priming the pump in a way. And, so I'll read one poet who has been influential for me in terms of inspiring me is W.S. Merwin. I'm going to tell this story on you. It won't take long. But Bubba and I went to a reading that W.S. Merwin had at the Cooper Union in New York, and we got in line to have books signed, and Bubba gets up to Merwin, and Merwin puts out his hand and says, "Bill Merwin, what's your name?" And Bubba says, Bill. He said his name was Bill. I tell that story over and over again, just to embarrass him. Okay, I'll read this final poem. It's the title poem, Things I Didn't Know I Loved, after Nazim Hikmet. It's November 2020. I'm sitting at a high-top table amidst a pandemic in a hotel coffee bar on the west bank of the Mississippi, Minneapolis. I just read the local newspaper. The Vikings beat the Packers. I don't care one bit. What I didn't know, I loved the Mississippi River, how it's always been in my life, sometimes rushing by as cold water from snow melt up north, sometimes lolling in slow procession, pulling me to the south in gentler lands. I didn't know I loved the trees, that bank the river, the elms and oaks, the birches and scrub pines. Especially, I didn't know I loved the saplings clinging so earnestly to the rock shelf above the river. I didn't know I loved the rock shelf set this way since the Ice Age. I didn't know I loved the Ice Age, or any age for that matter, especially the age of now, which I didn't know I loved this very now. Thank you.
Wow, Tim, that was amazing. And like now we're reveling in this very now, aren't we? Amazing. More, could we give Tim more applause? Would that be okay? Wow, I hope to grow up and write poems just like Tim's. Funny poems, totally companionable poems with that great voice. What's that? Steal them. Okay. I'll have to learn your name so I can credit you for that in the future. Okay.
I still stole from Tim.
You are already stealing from Tim. Okay, that's awesome. Can I just first also thank my poetry mom, Georgia Court, for creating this great sanctuary for poetry, and Bryn Durgan, the amazing Bryn Durgan, for the beautiful introductions and doing all these things that we don't even know she's doing. But maybe we can give them some applause too. Would that be all right? Yeah, please. Amazing. Wow. I think when we get panicked at night, we should just even read the paper in Tim's voice as we remember it. It will calm us. We will feel better, I think. We will. Oh, wow. One day I will write funny poems. I don't think you're going to hear any today. Well, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to try to be a good timekeeper. Wow. Georgia took me to the local radio station today. We got to read some poems that they were recording, which is such a blast. I live in a music city. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee. Does that mean that I grew up with country music? No. I think at one point I, probably like every young kid, wanted to be in the Beatles or something, wanted to be prepared for like the moment when George Harrison broke an arm or something. And so by the time I was ready, John Lennon was, in the great beyond. But this poem is in some ways, I thought it was interesting to talk to the, of course, many people at radio stations with, DJs are often musicians or lovers of music, and we were talking a bit about the beauty of those moments when, how to say this, you're in maybe a garage band and you're making a lot of noise, but there can be some alchemistry happening in it, where you're making some sounds you didn't know that were possible. So anyway, this poem is called Fender Strat with Wah Wah, Fuzzbox, and Whammy Bar. Whoa. And maybe like a smeared note is just like when you bend a note on a guitar. So it begins, a smeared note swells and scatters like a voice inside a cave, tugging the vibrato bar till the sound divides, like an egg yolk dropped in broth, inside you now, swirling like a geyser trapped in earth before the whole thing blows apart. As if the spirit world will talk back to you the more you face the amp and lean into yourself. You think there are so many ways to pray, this being, of course, another lining up of hands, a way to take the vagrant silence in yourself and make it deafening. Now it is the whole house breaking in the sound of surf, the echoes rattling the bookshelves, even without the sound. It's interesting, there's this line by Walter Pater, that poetry aspires to the condition of music. I feel like it's one of those lines like I'll be reading and thinking about for the rest of my life. I don't know that I'll ever come to a final idea of what that means, but in this poem it feels like there's the sense of, how to say it, the condition of music may be a state of wonder, a state of awe, how we bridge between this world and maybe all kinds of other worlds, spirit worlds. So anyway, thank you for listening to that one. I if you don't mind, this is such a safe space for me. I'm thinking I'm going to read some very brand new poems. I was telling James downstairs, who I don't think is listening, but I had this amazing...
He's listening.
He is?
Yeah, he's listening. Oh, yes.
Hey, James. Hey. So I had this amazing experience last summer. I got to go to a residency in Costa Rica, and I was in the Cloud Bridge area, which I guess is the highest elevation in Costa Rica. Now, if you don't mind my getting a little prop, this was courtesy of James. I mean, how do you begin to talk about a sloth without having a little bit of a, a little prop, But at any rate, we were coming down, three of us, from the Cloud Bridge area, just a remarkable place. And I'm not going to leave this here. They would prefer a chair, I think, as it slumps over. Anyway, we're driving down, we're on very bumpy roads, and as soon as we hit pavement, I see something at the side of the road, and it's one of those. It's a sloth. And I told the guy driving what I was seeing, and he stopped the car very quickly, and he, instantly kind of jackknifed the car a bit so that, not over, but so that it was blocking traffic. But the two of us went out to block traffic, and the third person in the car, when I looked back, was already carrying the sloth across the street. And, like this, because their arms are so, long, like anything could happen with them. They're very slow moving and they don't tend to strike, but they can. At any rate, you could imagine this could lead to a poem about a sloth. I have like a poem that's sort of in columns. It seems like it's, connoting, trees and all kinds of things. And it was a three-legged sloth. So, this just ended up in tercets. But at any rate, I loved the name for the sloth in Spanish, El Perezoso. It's beautiful, right? But anyway, you'll see something very soon, or you'll hear it very soon about that word. So the poem is El Perezoso, and then beneath it, in parentheses, the sloth. Your name in Spanish sounds badass, but even it calls you lazy. Yet your resistance to swiftness, your torpor, molasses slow and already congealing, isn't from laziness or sloth, that deadly sin, but blindness, near total at noon, diminishing by dusk, and dawn, if only slightly. You rely almost completely on your olfactory refinery. And didn't Nietzsche dream of a philosophy based on a great nose, ideally to be written by himself and his dog of two names, ego and pain? I love most your bookish leanings. Your memory must be immense. It seems you memorize each thing you touch. Tree limb, twig, bark, stem, branch. Each taste sensation adds another volume to your book of life, whose knowledge you ingest. Your stomach, thus, has a mind all its own. Well, technically four, like a cow's. Collectively, they mull over each bright leaflet for a month before their studies are complete. Speed reading, Teach me to read as voraciously as your digestive tract, whose avid waves of attention gently lap up roughly 80% of the braille they touch. And when you're ready to return each volume to the Library of Earth, it weighs approximately 1/3 of your body weight. But you must be so careful carrying your gnomic tomes home from such bright heights. Here illuminated, you are most susceptible to predation. Yet your slow-mo sideshow hides you from jaguars, harpy eagles, ocelots. And think of each species your legato cottage carriage makes possible, those badges of lichens that give your sun-scorched henna reds their glistening turquoise sheen, which you will snack on, too, when necessary. You are likely the dreamiest, most open, still mobile orphanage for bacteria and moths that have evolved to make of you a new universe. No wonder you have learned to survive falling at least once a week from a homesick mystic's daredevil peaks, not so much from klutziness as an emanation of your gentle sensualist's preference for tender greens that flourish at the narrow wrists of younger limbs. I understand that lately you survive only 9 out of every 10 falls. The fatal turns occur when you happen upon concrete. Those insatiable, dogmatic, unyielding, unteachable regions where our ever-diverging worlds increasingly meet. And now I see that among the harrowing perils you face in this astonishment we call life, already we rival the worst. Sorry, that's so long, but I really wanted to kind of take it for a spin. Thank you so much for that. Okay. It's always fun when you can find most of the poems in order. Here we go. So I've been on a sabbatical this year, and one of the great gifts of it, but also it's, I guess, like some things, there are good things, there are challenging things about it, but I've been, with my parents in their twilight chapters, and I've been taking care of my mom quite a bit, and visiting my dad, who's in hospice care now. So anyway, I'm envisioning these poems going together, and maybe shortly you'll see why, okay? The next poem, which has a few sections, is called The Move, and it has this skyhook, something that I heard Maxine Human read when I was an undergrad. It was an amazing experience, but she said this line about her friend Anne Sexton. She said, "Poetry was the tree that she clung to." The Move. More and more, Mom is falling out of her tree. This morning, she's at the base of her recliner when I walk down to greet her. "I'm changing myself," she says, but she can't get back into her tree without my help. The trouble is I'm feeling it in the knees today, and so I text my brother Ross, bright and early Sunday morning, on his one day off to let him know. Even for this next scene, where only the two of us are watching, she must have her blue-rimmed hat, kid gloves, fire engine red, her once bright yellow hospital socks, probably Dad's hand-me-downs, against her regal maroon turtleneck and jaguar print pajama bottoms. Now she looks ready for action as I start to slide my brother's surfboard behind her to help her back into the one tree she still trusts. I had a teacher once say, you know, if you say the numbers of your sections, it could make people nervous, especially if they go up to like 18 or something. Like, section 36. Oh, where's everybody going? Anyway, I'm not going to say that this is section number 2, but now this is a secret between us. But it's all going sideways. Her backside slides down the surfboard until she makes of it a headboard. And in her queenly way, she asks for sliced green apples and camembert. Still, she keeps pushing it all aside with the faded brown shower towel I keep putting back on her chest. Later, I pry white pearls of cheese from the shelf of her maroon top. When she starts coughing, and the move she can't make to sit up, she does now instinctively. And when she whispers to me, almost sweetly, Heimlich, I get behind her so fast and do the deed so efficiently. This is a first for my mother and me. Although the second time I've done it in this room. The first time, my best friend turns purple on Halloween candy, caramels, our fake plastic jack-o'-lanterns glowing orange against the paneling. This section is called Epithalamion, you know, a kind of poem for a wedding. The friend I mentioned, his name is Vern, just so this is clear in the connective tissue. Epithalamion. When I gave Vern's wedding toast as his best man, now over 30 years ago, I remember saying, his irascible brother-in-law, Tom, already motioning for me to be quick, that in some cultures, when you save a person's life, that person is indebted to you for life, while in other cultures, you are responsible for the life you save. Whichever legacy applies to us, I say, before so many people, but turning now to the newlyweds, I give you both my responsibility. From now on, it will be for you to decide each day for yourselves who will be guarded and who protects. This is a quote. My mom's talking here. Do you wish that I was dead? She says to me as I try to help her back up and into her chair. Our heads so close, the thought escaping her mouth seems to be escaping my mouth too. This thought I dare not speak ever, or even think, yet here it is, and in her voice, that is the voice I hear when I speak to myself, troubling or opening the silence. What can I say? Every mother knows when her child is lying. And yet it is no lie for me to say that I have wished for the end of her suffering, yes, but never, 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 ever have I wished for her life to end. And now she's laughing at us both. Our heads so close, the thoughts are fish that could keep swimming between us. Words that, even silently, are hers, as much or more than they are mine. Only one more section. And that, this may be the last, depending on time. Or I should even look at my watch.
There's 2 in it.
Okay, still in it, okay. The dream is not over, someone said. Okay, that's not in the poem, but it's in the poem we live. How else to get her back onto her feet, but to hold her with my whole life. Each person I have been and will become. Everyone I come to know who changes me. Each creature I might meet and come to love. Even people who infuriate me to no end. May our bickering enrich the ground we soil. And everyone else, stranger, relative, the same, each person I'll never know, who nevertheless still helps me get to this moment. And now it is my turn to give it all back to you with this reason for having lived, to bring us all to our feet. until we feel something surging beneath our shifting weight, some part of us spreading through the earth that holds us up so we can sense it all moving through us, a sudden nourishment, the sparks and depths of us charged, the sudden surges of electricity passing through the elaborate root systems that still connect us, even if we can't understand the messages we are receiving. We know now it's often just a burst of nutrients the trees send to one another, to a dying plant, or a warning when animals nearby are sampling leaves. And then, before we know it, we are standing on our own, and long enough for me to ease my mother back into her world. Thank you. Is there time for one more? There's probably not time for one more. No, wait.
Yeah, Bubba, come on up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is, okay, thank you.
And Tim. Yeah.
I don't want to turn it into a filibuster.
While we set up, we can give them another round of applause.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. We are scheduled till 6, so we've got about 12 minutes, so I'm going to try to maximize the time. But I just want to say, first of all, that you are in the presence of 3, not 1, not 2, not 4, 3 Columbia M.F.A. writing graduates from different years. Yeah.
What year?
Well, 82,
Oh my gosh.
83,
95.
95. Okay. So, in looking up Rick's backgrounds, a lot of the teachers that we had, you had too. You had Richard Howard. Did you ever?
You know, it's interesting.
Do you want to use the microphone, Rick?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
You have to flick it on,
Oh,
sorry.
thank you, yes. One can forget all of these things in this moment. Richard Howard, I met him later. He wasn't actually teaching at Columbia when I was there, but I had this amazing experience of sending him work and then getting this phone call after 5 p.m. on a Monday, and this voice that sounded like Burl Ives, and saying that he was going to take some poems for some of his magazines, and then asking like, oh, so you're in New York, let's get together. And I have to say, having a friend, so he's also from Ohio, I'm from Ohio, he was from Shaker Heights. I think there's a poem by Richard Hugo, that's one of his letters is devoted to Richard Howard, and he's like, you're from Strongsville and I'm Weeksville. You're Strongsville, I'm Weeksville. Richard Howard became an indelible mentor to me. And I got a chance to sit in on one of his classes at Columbia when he was talking about Wisława Szymborska, the Polish poet, and Merwin in the same class.
Right.
And it was the first time I had really heard anyone talk about Szymborska's poetry. That might have been 96, and that was, I guess, the year she had won the Nobel Prize. Years later, I would get a chance to do some translating of her work, co-translating really, while I was living in Poland in a Jesuit monastery. Thanks to, of all people, another teacher, Adam Zagiewski.
Oh, wow.
He was an amazing
Wow.
teacher, yeah, a brilliant, brilliant guy. But it's interesting, so who were your important people at Columbia?
Gerald Stern.
Oh my God, wow.
Philip Levine. Let's see, who else?
Stanley?
Robert Haas.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. So Tim and I had not so great an experience.
Oh, I'm
Tim had a good, okay experience, but you had an okay experience, right?
I did.
At Columbia, yeah. Since I'm trying to make it, like I said, I'll try to make the most out of this time. Let me just say this. Let me put a historical timestamp on this day, and then I'm going to ask you a big question. So we are, I think it's 3 days after it's been announced that the Department of Education is going to be dismantled. I'm sorry to bring this up, okay? Yesterday, they announced that they're going to completely axe the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which provides grants to all 50 states to the libraries. And so, I guess what I want to know is, what does poetry mean to you? What does poetry mean to your life at a time like this?
It's the tree I cling to. It's the tree I cling to, for sure. I'm sorry. I guess to borrow Maxine Kumin's words about her friend Anne Sexton, isn't it even more the tree we cling to? And maybe we can expand that tree, thinking about whatever our art forms are, and even the art forms that we don't practice, but we're enriched by. Goodness, yeah. I have to say, thinking about that happening during the first administration of the one who shall not be named, at least so far, I felt like I had to up my writing practice every morning to, if you don't mind my saying this, to unfuck myself, because I felt like the language was so toxic and unhelpful and destructive. I found myself writing poems that were odes to things that I couldn't imagine being praised, like misunderstanding or nightmares, that kind of thing. To be continued. Would you like to say?
Well, I look to two poets. I mentioned Nazim Hikmet, who was defiant. He was imprisoned for years. He suffered tremendously. And then I looked to Pablo Neruda, who also was defiant. And I mean, I'm not saying this because I'm defiant, although I guess I am, but we all have to hold on to a sense of outrage, because what's going on now is, oh, this is all just normal. It's not normal. It's not. None of it is normal. And this guy is this president of ours. Well, it's funny, my wife and I moved to New York in 1978. Trump was a joke. He was a total joke. He was on the New York Post headline, he was getting divorced from Ivanka. He was a joke. And he still is in my mind as a joke. And, we gotta think of Szymborska writing poems about Stalin with the Yeti. It's just fantastic. She's using this, code language to criticize Stalin. We gotta be defiant. We gotta be sinister. I think not just poets, but like everybody. We gotta be resistant and defiant. That's what I think.
What would you say to that?
What would I? Well, I think yes. I mean, I agree. I agree with all that. I asked the question because, and I got this sense from you, Rick, today. But poetry for me is not just something I like doing. It's my way of experiencing life, and so in that sense, it's like a practice. I'd be curious to know how you guys practice poetry daily and how you go about writing. Like, what are your inspirations? Do you sit down and you do it every day? Or is it just when it moves you?
I think of that song, "Anytime is the right time to be with the one you love." When it comes to writing poetry too, any time is the right time if you can make it so, right? I had this glorious week getting to work with local poets, and it's interesting. It felt to me like, of course it was ostensibly a poetry workshop. The theme was like writing poems of joy and resilience in dark times. But I felt like, there were the seeds of a movement here in what we're doing together, in the way we're bolstering one another and enriching one another in this moment. But I suppose getting back to the question of like writing poetry, I am, a friend of mine who is a Germanist, this was a line she told me while she had taken me to the lakes in Berlin. Do you know about the lakes that you can swim in for free in Berlin? Anyway, I had a residency at the Bertolt Brecht House in Denmark. She's like, "You're there, you're just a plane ride away. You should come here, bring a swimming suit, I'm not gonna tell you why." And so she takes me to this lake, and we're swimming in this like wonderfully warm bathwater, and she quotes Nietzsche's line, "Never trust a thought that occurred, that doesn't," okay, let me do this again. "Never trust a thought that doesn't occur while walking." I love that double negative. And then I thought, oh yeah, okay, I can get behind that. Maybe all know that moment when you're tired, you're sitting at your desk, maybe a kind of torpor or something can lower the ceiling on our thoughts, right? And so I've been doing a walking writing practice, you know. I haven't walked into any trees yet, that's pretty good. Mostly flat kind of walking surfaces. But I find I do that in the morning, with a very little notebook. Not to make a shameless plug, but I'm going to make a shameless plug. They have little notebooks like this at the front of the bookstore. On your way out, just look at the counter by the cash registers, and you'll see them. They have like prettier things on the fronts, but a little notebook like this, right, and a pen. It's wonderful. Yes, exactly. So anyway, how do we keep ourselves? How do we get out of our own way? Maybe is one thing I wanted to just say before turning things over. I mean, I feel like I have to get out of my way more. The news can, turn us into stone, it seems, at times. And so I need to keep moving and allow my thoughts to do that, and to sometimes write in that way. It's actually made for a great practice for me at any rate, Maybe it will be helpful to you, As we come up with other strategies, maybe we can share them at some point. That would be lovely. Tim, do you?
Yeah, Bubba and I have talked about this at length, and I think there's something to be said for being stupid. I mean, what I mean by that is you get your little notebook and you don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. You're totally unprepared for what's going to happen. You don't know what it is. That it's not just that you ascribe to that belief, is that you commit to it mm-hmm. in a way that makes what you write then fresh. I don't know how to explain it exactly.
I think your teacher embodies that, Gerald Stern. It
Oh,
seems like Gerald Stern's
Stern,
work
yeah.
is wonderful for that.
Yeah, he was a good example of that. So you're told. So what I said to Bubba is, you're like, Peter Falk in Colombo. You're like, didn't you just say that? You're playing stupid, but you're not stupid. You're right on to everything, and somehow, I mean, it's like a trick you play on yourself. So I don't know what I'm going to write. I take out my notebook. I don't know what I'm going to write, and somehow that makes it new and fresh.
This seems like to me a liberation of how to say this. I don't know that this was available to me always. That kind of belief in just the movement itself across the page, say, but it seems like I've been better at this, like to just go with a line and let the mind run with it, and to not impose an ending, but to discover one, and to try to continue to make that my practice. It's interesting how also, it seems like it's a practice in, not exercising control over others. It's such an interesting practice when you think of it as something more gentle, something more about listening as well as about activity, if that makes sense. Yeah.
For me, poetry is often a process of self-discovery. Mm-hmm. And I end up discovering things about myself that I didn't expect. And I'm wondering if you guys could tell us a little bit about what poetry has revealed to you about yourself. What has poetry revealed to you about yourself?
Shall I take that? I'll leap in with that one, Tim, if you like.
Oh,
Okay. It's interesting. So I'm reading you these poems that are totally heartbreak poems, I'm sure, right? The poems to my mother. And, I wish I had brought my funny poems. One day maybe I'll write them. I think I have them some somewhere. But what are they revealing to me about myself? I mean, it continually sort of in this practice of, you know, I think Keats called it negative capability, right? And reaching for things, you know, being okay with uncertainties, right? It's the poetic practice or the writing practice can be a practice in, you know, accepting certain uncertainties, certain things that we don't get to know. You know, speaking of Merwin, a line I quoted, I think probably twice in class this week was something he wrote in his 90s, right? Everything I don't know, I have lost none of it. You know, and thinking about the humbling of that, and even, you know, not beginning in arrogance, which we can certainly think immediately of certain models of that kind of behavior. I think our art form is an incredible, like, what would you say, a lifelong education in humility and compassion, empathy, this thing that Elon Musk said, you know, is a sort of overrated thing. I mean, oh my God. When I talk about what I teach, you know, I teach poetry, but I'm really teaching empathy, you know, teaching, and I feel like I'm learning in this moment with my parents in their twilight chapters, you know, like they're still teaching me more about love that I couldn't have known. So that I'm learning that now too. You know, I'm not done with my learning, you know, I'm not done with my ignorance, you know, I mean, knowing that I have so much to know and to learn, and that there will be a time when I'm much older and I will have lost none of it, what I don't know, and being actually okay with that, not masking it over with arrogance again, as we see some examples leading us now. It's a whole other movement, isn't it? This thing that we do and that we cherish.
I like that, whole nother movement, yeah.
I was just going to say, I was very moved by Rick's poems about his mother, and I wrote similar poems, and, you know, it really matters. I mean, poetry matters in that we can pay attention in a very special way to what happens in our lives and make note of it. That's why it matters. And I think the other part of this is it matters to convey your personality. Somehow I think every poem should not just be about a subject, but should be about a person. And that person is the writer. And you sort of want to charm the reader or the listener. And
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All right, we've got to conclude. So thank you very much, Rick and Tim, for coming. And this will be online in a couple of weeks or something like that?
This is recorded.
Right.
And by the way, all of their books are downstairs.
Available for purchase and signing.
Right, exactly.
Right.